Indeed, a great pleasure for me to be here and to share my perspective on Baloch nationalism with the distinguished panelists and guests today. I think this is a very timely conference addressing a topic of vital importance to the Baloch nation and its quest for liberation and self-determination. And I thank Kambar and his colleagues for organizing this. And I urge them, as our forefather did, our hero, Mir Kambar, as they say, Mir Kambar olad mazar zahma jano nama darar. But in today, the sword is the pen. So you, the new Mir Kambars, with using your pen, have the mission to liberate and restore our sovereignty to where we were before. And of course, the distinguished presentation made by Dr. Enayat and Dr. Nader gave you a very good historical perspective, but I just want to add that, you know, Balochistan has historically been always a free, independent country. You know, and of course, when I was a kid, my father and grandfathers, they used to refer to Baluchi Dora. Baluchi Dora, they refer to an era where their Balochistan, they ruled themselves. They were free. There were no foreign domination or control. So that is Baluchi Dora. And that, even during the British, they didn't touch the Baluchi institutions. They created their own parallel institution, like agency, political agent, and so on. But right now, it is really a question of survival for the Baloch, because they have targeted our nationhood, our identity, our existence, our culture, and of course they are plundering our resources. Also, it's a totally different. It's a question of life and death for the Baloch nation. And of course, this is just a small blimp in our history, because every country has been occupied in one time or another time. That include Persia, the Mongols, the Arabs, the Greeks. Everybody has occupied them at one time or another. And in fact, when the Greeks invaded Persia, occupied them, Alexander, the greatest conqueror of antiquity, suffered the biggest casualties in Balochistan. Why? Because the Baloch Sarmachars conducted the same operation that today our Sarmachars are conducting in both eastern and western Balochistan. So if we could cope with Alexander the Great, these new occupiers will face the Baloch also. And of course, the other observation that our history has not been really different from the history of other countries, Dr. Enayat can testify, because we had, of course, feudalism in Balochistan. You had feudal lords ruling everywhere, here and there, but that was also the case in Europe in the era of feudalism. In the medieval ages, 14th, 15th, 16th century in Europe, we had that. And then, of course, in Europe, you had the emerging central kingdom ending the era of feudalism. That also happened in Balochistan. We had tribal confederacies, 15th, 16th century, uniting the Baloch. So it's really, our history was interrupted by colonialism, of course. And Balochistan was too big to be swallowed by Persians, Punjabis. That's why they divided it, the British. And of course, as long as Baloch are divided, they will be weak, vulnerable to domination. So the only solution, the only hope for the Baloch is really to unite. If they unite, nobody can stop them, the momentum they gained. These are my observations on that. But let's go to the rise of Baloch nationalism, the quest for self-determination. Of course, as you know, the rise of Baloch nationalism is a direct response to the division and occupation of their homeland by Pakistan and Iran and their oppressive, exploitative, and discriminative policies toward the Baloch. Therefore, the Baloch national movement is a true manifestation of the Baloch nation's aspiration for self-determination and their quest for the establishment of a free, democratic, and progressive Baloch state where the rule of a duly elected parliament is supreme. It is a reflection of the Baloch's determination to put an end to their current status of being divided, marginalized, oppressed, and reduced to second-class citizens in Iran and Pakistan. To borrow from the US Declaration of Independence when the Americans rose up against the British, it is necessary to spell out for the international community the causes which compel the Baloch to seek independence. As articulated in American Declaration of Independence, quote, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature entitle them a decent respect to the opinion of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. And of course, all of you are familiar with the long list of grievances and injustices done against the Baloch people, and that can be several volumes, but just to outline a brief one, well, one, of course, the biggest crime is the division and forceful annexation of Balochistan into Iran and Pakistan against the Balochi will. They never asked the Baloch whether you want to be part of Pakistan, whether you want to be part of Iran. They just don't. And of course, they never asked the Baloch if you want to stay in Pakistan. I mean, in civilized world, you have it in the United Kingdom where we live, democracy. The government of United Kingdom and the government of Scotland reach an agreement to hold a referendum whether the Scottish, they want to stay or not. A very civilized, very legal manner. But you think Baloch can have a similar demand and that be respected in Pakistan and Iran? Because we are dealing with two undemocratic governments. That is our problem. If we had true democracy in Pakistan and Iran, like Europe, then this issue can be resolved very easily, referendum under international supervision. Ask Baloch whether they want to become independent or they want to stay part of. So that should be our universal demand. Because that is the right of every nation, self-determination. It is a right recognized under international law and under UN Charter. So, and of course, both governments, they refuse such a referendum. And of course, you are familiar, it was mentioned, the systematic plunder of Balochistan's immense natural resources. You know that, for example, Balochistan accounts for 30% of natural gas produced in Pakistan, but Balochistan receives only 17%. The other 83% is, of course, you know, it goes to Punjab, Yeah. And of course, Balochistan, in spite of all these riches, is one of the poorest countries in the world. And of course, you know that Balochistan, in both Iran and Pakistan, has the worst indicators for life expectancy, school enrollment, adult literacy, infant mortality, and access to drinking water and sanitation in both countries. These are facts. You can check it for yourself. And of course, you know that Balochistan has been kept deliberately as the poorest, least developed, and the most neglected province by unjust policies in both country government. And it is very interesting, I read you this quote. Mr. Khaled Atbari, he was the last foreign minister of Shah of Iran before he was overthrown. But most importantly, he served also as the Secretary General of CENTO. For you young people, Central Treaty Organization, it was a Cold War organization, including Iran, Pakistan, and Turkey. So this guy served as Secretary General of CENTO. And you know, this is a quote from him in an interview with Senek Aliso, the writer. So he said, this is a quote. He said, in CENTO, we always assume that the Baluch would attempt to create their own independent state someday with Soviet support. We said this is Cold War, huh? So it was desirable, this is quote, this was desirable to keep them as politically weak, disunited, and backward as possible. End of the quote. This is a guy who is Secretary General of CENTO, and CENTO, its members are Pakistan and Iran. So you know why the Baluch are around? So disunited, divided. This is the official policy. And of course, you know that the massive loss of life, I'm just recounting what is happening to the Baluch, the crimes against Baluchan, the massive loss of life among civilians and destruction of their properties caused by brutal and continuing military operation by both Iranian and Pakistani government. And of course, you are well aware, and Mir Muhammad Talpur mentioned that, you know, the forced disappearances of dozens of Baluch intellectuals and political activists, displacement of 150,000 to 500,000 people internally because of this military operation in eastern Baluchistan. And of course, extrajudicial killings of dozens of people that you have. We are indebted to the human rights organization who are represented here for documenting that. I think we have to do more to hold those accountable for crime against humanity and crime against peace for these atrocities against Baluchan. And of course, you know, the state policies aimed at changing Baluchistan demography by flooding the land with settlers from Punjab and Persia in the hope of reducing Baluch majority to a minority in their own homeland. And of course, this is an ever-growing threat to Baluch national identity, language, culture, and way of life. And of course, you know that testing nuclear weapon in Baluchistan, endangering the life of the Baluch, destroying their environment, their habitat, and of course, Baluch never accepted that. So these are really crimes against humanity. And of course, awarding, confiscating and misappropriating Baluch lands and properties in Gwadar, Chawar and other areas to build cantonment and colonies for military personnel and settlers in both Pakistan and Iran. You know, it's really our land. If we don't move, we will be minority, we'll be like Indian in the US disappearing. And of course, awarding mining concession, awarding Gwadar port operation, building Gwadar naval base and a land corridor to China by Pakistan against the wish of Baluch people. And of course, building Iran-Pakistan pipeline on Baluch land without taking the wishes of Baluch people into consideration. So we have to these are all crimes that we have to be aware of. And then, of course, you know, you can look at the next to this paper, mass execution of Baluch political prisoners and systematic and widespread discrimination against the Baluch by Iranian governments. If you look at the, you know, in Iranian Baluchistan, unlike Pakistani Baluchistan, of course, you have to give credit to the strong and mature national movement in eastern Pakistan. In western Baluchistan, you know that only one governor general appointed from Tehran has been a Baluch one, and that is a Shia also. No Baluch. And officially, the Article 115 of the Iranian constitution bars 1/3 of the population in Baluch Kurds, Turkmens, which are Sunni, from occupying the post of the presidency or supreme leader. So it is really discrimination institutionalized in the constitution. And of course, don't forget that